Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on security topic, which is the future of campus single sign-on. Our presenter today is Warren Yen, who is the IT Security Development and IAM Supervisor. WebAuth has served the UCI community for many years, but as UCI begins to adopt more cloud solutions, integration with SSO has become more difficult. Let's find out from Warren what is in store for UCI SSO as we begin the transition away from WebAuth. Welcome, Warren.
So just kind of logistical first, I have a sign-up sheet up here. If you guys don't mind, after the presentation, sign up. I'm going to raffle off an Amazon gift card. This is for your stay. So as Sonali mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the future of campus. Before I do that, I'll kind of give a brief intro on myself. Since I've only been at UCI for about less than a year now, I've worked at higher ed all my life in identity management. So I was formerly at UCLA for about 13 years, so I've been in this UC higher ed system for pretty much all my entire career. So today I'm going to kind of talk about I'm going to give a kind of brief history of where we're at, talk about where we're going, why we're changing, and then talk about timeline and how things work. So kind of just a show of hands, how many people know what single sign-on is? Good. What about WebAuth? What about Shibboleth/SAML? So I'll cover all that kind of really quickly. So single sign-on is the ability to sign in once and have access to multiple applications. WebAuth is UCI's homegrown system that was built in the 90s. From what I understand, it's one of the early higher ed single sign-on systems that was developed in the community. It's widely deployed now. There's about 400 plus applications that are integrating with us. And one of the drawbacks of it is it only works within the UCI space. Shibboleth or SAML is a standard that was released in the 2000s. It's vetted by the Organization of Advancements, Structured and Information Standards, or OASIS. So OASIS is a non-profit consortium that vets information security standards. We're seeing a lot of adoption into the SAML world because as kind of the university starts shifting from homegrown applications to cloud vendors, third-party vendors that provide you with service, it's becoming a little bit more difficult to integrate with WebAuth. So people are either writing custom code or SAML, since it's an open standard and adopted worldwide, the integration is a little bit easier. Right? It provides federation, which is the idea of being able to sign in from your home campus to other organizations, applications that are part of the federation. A use case of this is we all use the learning management system, UCLC. That's an application that's maintained by OP, but you're using UCI's credentials to sign in. And if you're from San Diego, you're using San Diego's, and kind of it all works that way. You see, but as a larger, yes.
I just wanted to remark that the Adobe Corporation is moving to SAML authentication for all of its applications. This means Acrobat Pro, Photoshop, all that stuff. They're all moving to SAML.
Yeah. So, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later, but as it's gaining adoption, we're integrated with things like DocuSign, which they're with on. We do Qualtrics, I think SumTotal, the learning management system, and Connexus, the travel system. They're all SAML based. So it allows us to kind of use your home campus's identity to sign into this application. And since it's kind of widely adopted in the world and a lot of higher eds in the US, we think that's kind of the next step forward that we can take. So why change the SAML now? As I mentioned earlier, it's standards-based. So Adobe works with it, Office 365, Google, list goes on. So what we see now is also for homegrown applications, there's a reduction of application. Right now, the way you integrate with WebAuth, we either borrow some library that was developed a while ago that isn't as maintained heavily, or you develop your own kind of WebAuth integration code. Once you authenticate a person, you take the small information that you have, either a campus ID or a UCINet, and you search all that for additional information about them. With SAML and our shibboleth service, we're able to deliver more data at real time for you. So the moment the person signs in, we can pull data about you from the OITL data. So if you have information like email, names, department information, we can provide access control from KSAM's rules through that first initial sign-in. So it eliminates some of that code overhead the application developers currently take. As I mentioned, it's widely adopted and there's federation support. So we as UCI, we are part of the Common Federation, which is the United States Research and Education Federation. So most of the higher eds in the US are in that federation. Also, vendors like Adobe, SumTotal, and then Qualtrics are also part of that federation. So being able to then sign in from your home institution into those applications are a bit easier. There's better library support. So with Shibboleth itself, you don't actually have to develop your software. You either install a package that comes with your operating system or your web server and kind of do some configuration and off you go. I'll elaborate a little more on how that actually works near the end of the presentation, but it's also more secure because there's a larger adopted audience. There's a group dedicated to just provide Shibboleth upgrades, right? And for me personally, the most important part is we maintain two services now, WebAuth and Shibboleth. Why are we maintaining two separate single sign-on systems? There's just additional overhead that the team has to maintain that I do personally like to eliminate. So this is the tentative timeline. It's still in draft form, but at the end of October, what the team is going to launch is a new UI for WebAuth and Shibboleth. Since you guys use it every day, some of that is fairly dated. I think it was done in the early 2000s. So we're creating a more modern, responsive feel as our first step. Then next year, we're planning on providing all the training documentation and having training sessions to assist users to migrate. And at a certain point next year, we'll also tell users to begin using SAML rather than WebAuth to make that transition easier later on. And then we'll begin assisting applications to migrate to SAML. And then the following year, in 2021 and 2022, we want to migrate all remaining applications, and finally in 2022, we want to shut down WebAuth. So this is the new UI that we'll be launching at the end of the month. Tentatively is scheduled for October 28th. There should be a blog mail going on in about a week, and then it's going to be posted on the ORT website and some of the student websites next week as well. So it's fairly similar to a lot of design you see, Amazon, Google. It's fairly straightforward. We're trying to keep it as minimalistic as possible. The only feature is just served as you sign in. We'll provide secondary information of, hey, I'm having issues, what do I do? But the main feature of this is you sign in and you move along the way. People spend 10, 15 seconds on this page a day. So this is a kind of a high-level diagram of how things work with SAML. This is more for, I would say, third-party vendor application. So what you have here is at the top, you have the end user. They're trying to access a service provider. Service provider being application they need access to. So in this case, let's say I'm trying to sign into UCPath. What UCPath will then assert is it's going to trigger something called an authentication request. It's, hey, I know this person's coming from UCI. I need them to log in. So at step 3, they'll get challenged from credentials, and they'll sign in. At that point, at step 4 to step 5, what step 5 does is it sends a SAML response. In that SAML response, it will contain your successful authentication, but it will also contain data about you. So at that bottom left identity provider, once you actually sign in, it would look at the OITL data, find Warren, and find information about you. Depending on what the application and the service provider and identity provider have negotiated, that's the data that gets sent back. Right? In the OITL data, there are dozens of attributes, but the application doesn't necessarily need them all. So the typical use case we see is generally things like a unique identifier, whether it's a campus ID here or a UTM ID. You typically send a name, email address, and ideally some sort of access control information so that the application can make that decision and have the user sign. So these sets of procedures are typically more for the homegrown application. So this is the process of how you would integrate with Shibboleth SV. Third-party cloud vendors are, I would say, it really depends on how they implement things. So things can get a little tricky, but usually those vendors provide you with enough documentation that if you work with my team, we'll kind of get that all sorted out. But for homegrown applications, typically what you would do is you would install a Shibboleth service provider. There's packages for Apache, IS, NGINX, and Mac. So I have the most familiarity with Apache, essentially it's a modship C++ module that you would install in your Apache. You would do some configuration updates to the install afterward. So there's a couple configuration files of, hey, I want to connect to this service, I want these data elements, and you do that configuration. After that, you will provide step 3, that information to the identity management team and the certificate that gets generated when you install that service, so that we do negotiation and send data in a secure manner. After we register you, your application should be working at that point. And once a person signs in your application code, you would read environmental variables and take the environmental variables and do what your application does. Right? You give them access, you map it to certain elements, you read it, and kind of off you go. So I think what I typically have done in the past when I was at LA and we started the process of migrating everybody from the homegrown, poorly named now at the time service called ISIS. That was 13 years ago to Shibboleth. We asked people to allocate about a month's time to kind of play with Shibboleth, learn about it, and begin that migration process. And typically in the history that I saw, it took about two and a half years to move about 800 applications that were on that old legacy system to Shibboleth. So in this case, we're targeting about 2 years because there's only about 4 or 5 applications. But I think once you get a feel for how the service works and how Shibboleth and SAML work, getting that integration for the second, third, fourth apps kind of it's an hour. A lot of it's more.
Are those the 4 the only ones that the certifiers are for, or is there
So-
for Node and Java and stuff like that?
So if you're using Java, what I've typically done in the past is I use Apache to front it and then proxy it on Tomcat. You could implement, I think the Spring framework actually has a SAML package or jar for it, so you can use that as well. But that gets a little more complicated. Right? So using the provided packages, it handles all the SAML transaction for you, and the only thing you really need to do is read the data. And I believe there's other kind of SAML implementations in other languages, but we typically recommend this approach because it's language agnostic. You really don't need to develop the SAML code. It just creates a layer of complexity and applications. Any other questions around this? So that was pretty much it.
In that case,
Sure.
so I'm a manager here, I'm just the guy who hangs out with people who get all the work done. You know what I mean? And I work with a group of IT developers, and so for something like this, currently they use WebAuthor for all the applications. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to start introducing to this, them, to this?
So-
now? What do you want?
A lot of this campaign, the IM team and the security team will begin that initiation. I think what I personally want to do is have a lot of the training material documented rather than, hey, we're doing this, figure it out yourselves. I want to make sure that we put in our best effort to help them with the transition.
Can we call you, and we can direct you?
Sure, I think me or the IM team is probably probably the time to kind of get the implementation started. But I think early next year, once we kind of settle down with DCPath, because that's kind of where both of my team's efforts at right now, that's kind of where we'll start that process. We're currently, some of our students are currently in that application.
So if one application had Shibboleth configured and a user logged into there and then in the same browser, they would put in, they're trying to connect to another application through.
It would operate the same way now, right? The way it works now is, we actually run both WebAuthn and Shibboleth, but the way Shibboleth currently works is it proxies that authentication to WebAuthn. So you're actually signing into WebAuthn. Once you sign in, then Shibboleth says, hey, I already know the person's signed in, so along the way you go.
Okay,
But it'll still maintain that single sign-on. You sign in here once, and then you're good for the rest of
okay.
But as you know, with single sign-on, it really depends on configuration of the application, of the way you want to time them out, and when our identity provider times you out.
Is there a development that we need to be doing now, or could start now, or we have to wait for something to release on your end?
Everybody's more than welcome to integrate with Shibboleth now, and actually, people already do that on plus applications.
So it
if
won't
you want-
change with this?
It won't change. What will happen is, by the time we migrate everybody off of WebAuthn, we'll completely shut down the WebAuthn interface, and then we'll authenticate directly to our backend data storage, rather than using WebAuthn. So that piece in 2022 will be transparent, but getting everybody to Shibboleth is kind of that step.
How do you register the applications? Do you have to register them all separately? I mean,
So that's something that needs to be improved on now. Right now, it's a ServiceNow form, where you would type in kind of, this is the application, this is the certificate, these are the contacts, and this is the data I need. But in that form now, you can register kind of, this is the QA environment, this is the dev environment, so we can do all of that in one go. I prefer that it be one request per application, that way we can keep track of the data needs. Because every application has different sets of data requirements, so we want to make sure that those are set requests.
it's all being served by the same Apache.
If it's done in the same Apache, I still suggest doing a separate request. In SAML, what you can do, there's a notion of something called an entity ID. Essentially, this is just a unique identifier for your application. I always recommend doing a unique entity ID per application. That way, application B has one data set, and application C has another data set. You don't mix and match rather than having that one common entity ID. It's just additional kind of security.
And we can implement this on individual developers' workstations as well?
Yeah, that's a possibility, yeah. And one of the things that we'll try to improve here is having kind of dedicated test environments, so that if you actually are doing dev work or having test instances, we prefer connecting to that environment rather than connecting to production, like most people do now. It's just kind of easy.
Do you have any notion of logging in as a user? So if I want to make sure it's going to work with the user and I'm an admin, I want to make sure that it works with my users and not because I'm an admin.
So the Shibboleth application itself has a notion of impersonation. That's something that Josh and I need to discuss. Because that opens up to
Yeah, so we have some applications which first test WebAuthn, authenticate WebAuthn, and then we have our local database, like if we have to give access to one department. So then we check our local database, so is that possible with,
So with SAML, what we can do, since it's looking into the OIT LDAP, the OIT LDAP does have like department name, department codes, so that can get sent back to the application when the person signs in.
okay,
So rather, if that's all you really need to determine access control, then that should be enough for you. The other option is potentially leveraging KSAM's access control application that IT manages, so we can create rules.
so like we have our own SQL database and in table we put the campus IDs. So these 10 campus IDs have access. So first authenticate with WebAuth, then check that subsystem for those.
So that would still work in this case, right? You just take, at that point, you just take the campus ID and then check on your system,
Uh-huh,
like how you do now.
okay.
But I still recommend potentially moving to KSAMs or the centralized access management.
So with this, we'll still need to do a separate request to KCM's.
No.
No.
So
we'll get
KSAMs
KCM's
roles are
roles.
actually in the OITL map.
So we'll get KCM's roles through
You could.
Chip.
That isn't there now, but that's something we're
When?
we can talk about that.
Yeah,
But that's probably post that. It's a simple configuration on our end, we just have to make sure, since all the roles are stored into one attribute, doing that configuration is essentially a regular expression that we have to say, hey, application A only gets these names. So that's something we just need to test out and formalize the process.
If you're checking KSAMs, would Shibboleth return the KSAMs roles, or could you tell it only authenticate them if they have these roles and return a false
So-
if they don't, rather than just a list of roles that come?
So essentially, I think in the paradigm of identity management, you're talking about authorization. Authorization is typically done at the application end, unless there's a centralized authorization module, which doesn't exist now. So typically, we just send the data, and the application needs to determine, hey, does this person have access or not? And in that case, should do that.
Okay.
So that's kind of what my question was. Ostensibly, everybody with a UCI net ID would have access, and you're expecting a user profile on the application to then enforce or deny access?
That's currently how it looks.
Okay. As opposed to having like, I've formerly worked with like a GDS list that we had attributes and we loaded people into that, and then as an application manager, I could put people in or out of that authentication list on the Shiv side. And not necessarily have to authenticate on the application side. You wouldn't even get into the login.
So, currently, anybody that would sign in, right? If you have your username and credentials, you have a session, right? It's
That's simpler to manage it that way, that you have the credentials, but then the application, a user profile created on the application side would enforce it.
Because if we're integrating with 500-600 applications, having that access control, where an application has dozens of different access controls, is
Right.
something that isn't that useful. Manager team currently said, welcome to take that on responsibility, get budget for that, but that's a different story.
You know, I used something before called find groups, and
So even if you get that data back,
Right.
that app still needs to make that determination, right? I can say,
Yeah.
hey, Warren has access to
the site,
the site,
right,
but that's just telling you Warren has access. That application needs to make that decision. if
right.
That's
What do
true.
you have access to inside the
Yes.
application?
Any other questions?
What about LDAP for authentication? What's the future of LDAP? Is it
That's a
a-
discussion I need to have. I mean, I think that some of that still doesn't exist because not all applications can, most should integrate, and I think even Jason's side, like with the wiki, he's starting to make that move towards setting. Any other questions? Well, thank you, everybody. Make sure to sign in for a chance to win.